This poem is called The Thing Itself. Of all of the poems that we're looking at by Chris Wallace-Crabbe, this is probably the more complex of his poems, even though it's one of the shorter ones that we are considering. It's quite the meta poem in the sense that Chris Wallace-Crabbe's writing about writing, and for himself or for a poet in general, this is the thing itself, which they're all about. And so in that sense, it's quite a tricky poem to grasp at first, because it is a little bit difficult to ascertain exactly what it is he's trying to achieve. And so, as I've mentioned, for a poet, this is the thing itself, the words, trying to understand and capture that thing itself, the idea that they're trying to capture. The title, he's taken the title from a philosophical term or a phrase that's used in Germany, and it refers to this idea of an object being as it is, independent of observation. So quite the abstract idea, and as I mentioned at the start, one of the reasons why the poem itself is probably one of the more complex of the poems that we're looking at by Chris Wallace-Crabbe. And so the idea around this phrase, quite an abstract idea in and of itself, but that they would be as they are, independent of observation. So if we're thinking about poetry and words, being able to consider words and the poem itself, and the idea that it could just be as a product, as an idea, as a work of art unto itself, quite the abstract thing to get our heads around with regards to looking at poetry. But that's also, I guess, one of the challenges that he himself is describing as a poet, as a writer. So if we just look at some structural elements, this is written in tercets, quite clearly structured all the way throughout. And we can see that as the poem progresses, there are some elements where he's very clearly choosing to conclude paragraphs, or verses, and then spends quite an extensive bit of time before he concludes the next sentence. And so it does vary in terms of the way it's been structured, but that is also giving us a bit of a hint or a clue as to some of the different ideas that are being captured throughout. So the first part, the first 3 lines, the first verse, gives us a really practical opening from the perspective of a writer. Right? It's really practical. terminology, the important thing is to build new sentences, to give them a smart shape, to get acquainted with grammar like a new friend. So he's looking at it from a writer's perspective. What's the nuts and bolts of writing? But then he goes from that very practical opening to a more vivid, slightly abstract shift in the second verse, where he says one rubs down syntax into coarse familiarity, such foreplay as closes down all thought. So he's talking about, for a writer, for a poet, familiarity with words, but more so like an intimate relationship with words as a poet. And he evokes that imagery here in that verse. And then we get this quite extended section with the next 4 verses, which are essentially one long sentence. And he contemplates a little bit on the writing process in different ways. Were it not that the undertaking is too mannered, as gnostic as a shower of rabbits, I would like to go right back, devising a sentence, unlike any such creature in creation, like nothing on the planet, a structure full of brackets and cornices, twigs, pediments, dados and halos and bells, full of nuts, butter and flowers, sinewy, nerved, capable of blotches of waving hair. He goes back and forth now between a few different ideas. At first, were it not that the undertaking is too mannered, almost alludes to some of the formal structures that go about the writing of poetry. But then includes, as gnostic as a shower of rabbits, this really fantastical allusion. Included here. And then this idea that I would like to go right back, devising a sentence unlike any such creature in creation, like nothing on the planet. And then these references here, full of brackets and cornices, twigs, pediments, dados and halos and bells, full of nuts, butter and flowers, it becomes more and more abstract as it's flowing through, but also all of the different ornaments that he's considering here. It's sort of quite baroque in nature, which is ironic considering he wants to create something that is unlike any such creature in creation. Highly ornamental, and decorative. Full of nuts, butter and flowers, sinewy, nerved, capable of blotches or of waving hair. This last little section is quite abstract, but also evoking a lot of imagery here. This is sinewy and nerved, so coming to life. But then, the blotches and the waving hair are metaphorical in the way that they've been referenced. You could read the blotches as being, scattered, fragmented sections of words. whereas the waving hair could be undulating lines, long flowing lines. So he's looking at different ideas here, experimenting, again, with the thing itself, experimenting with words, with the way that it could look. And so the poem reflects his reflection on words. That would be a sentence to really show the buggers quite the uncouth, colloquial line amongst all of these perfect lines that he's tried to capture earlier on. And it's a little bit of the poet himself coming out, him and that Australian colloquialism. What we see here too is, this imitative form that he also includes. Again, replicating the writing process. Like a cute new thing. The line itself is quite cute, right? Just being short and succinct. And so we see this imitative form coming to life with these cute and new things. The poem then concludes, again, quite abruptly. As I mentioned at the start, it's not a very long poem in and of itself, but he continues to reflect on this idea of writing, or like a tree recently invented by some utterly brilliant committee. So we become absurdist as he tumbles towards the end. This idea is impossible. It's one which is suggesting that nature could be devised by a committee. So he's reflecting on all of these different ways of going about writing. This idea, this absurdist idea, could be interpreted as reflecting how different poets reinvent or re-image the idea of nature. This is what he's looking for. This is the thing itself that he so wishes to find. He ends, it's a very, very short verse. It would glitter, articulate, strum and diversify. It would be the thing itself. So this first section of the last verse, we've got 4 really distinct verbs being used by the poet to try and encapsulate what poems could be or should be. Before he concludes with the title itself, it would be the thing itself. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, it's difficult to ascertain exactly what it is that Wallace-Crabbe's trying to explore here. But the thing itself, you could interpret it as creation, you could interpret it as art, it could be of writing, obviously. All of these different things that he's trying to explore. With this particular poem, I think it captures one of the paradoxes of an artist or a writer. In that, as they are trying to create, as they are going through their process, can a writer or an artist ever actually catch the thing itself or find the thing itself? Chris Wallace-Crabbe wouldn't be the first poet to ever contemplate that idea of, can we ever find the meaning of anything, whether it be through art or writing or music. That exploration of meaning is something which is actually evident in some of the other poems that we've looked at with regards to Chris Wallace-Crabbe. And so here, this particular poem is really getting straight to the heart of it. And as we sort of reading through and trying to ascertain what's going on with this particular poem, we could assert that, he's having a contemplative moment. This is his contemplative moment about what he does and the nature of writing in and of itself. He's both a realist and an idealist. He's speaking about himself, but he's speaking about the capacity to create new works, new phrases. There's so many different ideas going on with this particular poem. So whilst short, it's also quite complicated. But that is a bit of an analysis on the thing itself by Chris Wallace-Crabbe.